Hello, everybody. I'm Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series, Solo Standards for Piano, and Playing Solo Jazz Piano. And this is a very special episode of my YouTube channel because we're celebrating the birthday of one of my mentors and absolute heroes, Fred Hersch. And some of you might know that Fred Hersch is he wrote the introduction for playing solo jazz piano, and it's fair to say that he's one of the most revered pianists, and especially solo pianists, certainly alive today, but really a transformative solo pianist in the history of jazz. And I'm going to do a follow-up episode about some ways that he's changed jazz piano forever. But I thought today I would tell a personal story that changed my life, and I think there's lots of lessons to glean from it. And looking back, this was kind of a wild thing. So I'm going to start at the beginning of my relationship with Fred Hersch, which was it was very cool. I was obsessed with the pianist Kenny Kirkland, and I still am. If you've never heard Kenny Kirkland, I highly recommend you listen to albums like Black Codes from the Other Side by Wynton Marsalis and Requiem by Branford Marsalis, and listen to him. And I was in the midst of collecting every Kenny Kirkland album that I could find, and this was at a time when you couldn't actually access things super easily. And so this is so funny in retrospect because it's so not the way the world works now. But I would find a rare Kenny Kirkland album, and then people were selling like used versions on Amazon, and I would write to them, and I don't even remember why, but I would offer them a trade somehow, I think. And so I wrote to this guy who had an Arturo Sandoval record where Kenny plays. It's a Clifford Brown tribute, and was writing him and telling him I was really interested in Kenny Kirkland. And this guy sent me the Kenny Kirkland record, and he sent me these two Fred Hersch records. Or at least I can remember that he sent me the Trio at the Vanguard record from, it must have been from the early 2000s. And so that was my introduction to Fred Hersch by the kindness of a stranger. And I wasn't immediately captivated by his playing, but it was really when I started listening to Songs Without Words, and that album just completely changed my life. It's a triple album, and all three are fantastic, but the first one is all original pieces by Fred, and I just was so mesmerized at what he could do at the piano. I'd never heard anything quite like it. And I learned that he was Brad Meldau's teacher, and that was kind of a time in, where if you were a pianist, like Brad Meldau was the thing that was happening. And so I was like, wow, this guy, he plays incredibly, so inventive, and he taught like probably the most influential pianist of that moment. But I never really thought to make contact with him until I attended a master class where I was given a lesson by a guy named Toby Canisberg. Toby, you're probably not out there, but I remember you. And he showed me an exercise that he said was Fred Hersch's exercise. And the exercise was basically that you would play just one voice of a song. So, for instance, the melody, if I'm playing The Nearness of You. And you play it again and again until you're happy with it. And then you add just one other melody to it. So now you have two voices. Keep doing that until you feel like you have some kind of level of mastery over it. And then if you get that far, you add a third voice, which could be split between the hands, or it could be two in the left hand. I bet you could guess what comes next. And I find 3 actually to be the hardest, which is 4. Now each of these steps you could practice for hours, if not days, if not weeks, if not months, right? But I was fascinated by it, and I had some questions just about like the mechanics of how you would practice that. And so somebody encouraged me, I guess, or I was just exploring, and I went to Fred Hersch's website, and his email was just there. And maybe I've said this before on the channel, but it's a brilliant thing about studying jazz, that like it's not that hard to get in touch with your heroes. It's not like trying to be an actor and you want to get in touch with Tom Cruise or something. It's like people actually want to be found. So I emailed him with this question, and he emailed me back and said, I can't really answer this, over email, but you should come in and take a lesson and visit my studio, which was like, whoa. Brad Meldau took lessons with him, and now he wants me to come and take lessons with him. We're like crazy. And of course, there's a cynical version of that, which is like, you should pay me for my time. But that's not how I feel. I'm not feeling the cynical version of that. And so it came to pass that I made a plan to go to New York. And this next part involves a name drop and a brag, which is that around the same time, Marion McPartland, the great pianist, composer, and broadcaster, had come to visit where I was studying at the Eastman School of Music. And she had heard me play and had invited me on her program. Which, wild, I was a sophomore at this time. And so I headed to New York, and I only had 2 days. And one day, I was going into the studio to record an episode of Piano Jazz, which all of my heroes, like Bill Evans, have been on. And then the next day, I was going to go and have a lesson with Fred. And now, I was a very serious student, and I guess I still do have this personality that I'm a teacher's pet and want to impress people. But I also just loved his music. And so I was just looking through an old folder, and like I just started transcribing all of his tunes. Here's Endless Stars. I did this all while I was in college, including the entire Songs Without Words set. Here's Bird in the Rain, beautiful piece. Here's Waltz. Oh no, they're all falling. Here's Tango. And of course, I wrote Fred and told him, hey, I transcribed the entire album of Songs Without Words, and he wasn't that impressed. It's not that he wasn't impressed, but that's not, that's not really what he was hoping to hear. So I went to Fred's apartment, which is in Soho. He's got a beautiful loft and an incredible piano, and he was very kind. He's not necessarily a person that immediately gives you a super warm feeling, but he was very kind to me. I remember that he made a joke about, he asked, "How is Maid Marian?" And I just didn't get the reference at all. And then I played for him. He was very nice. He talked a lot about piano sound, but he said something that changed my life, which is kind of the focal point of this video, which is that he said something like, you're young, you're talented, you're ambitious, whatever. He gave me a number of compliments, and then he said, "So what?" And of course, at that moment, my heart sank. Like, what do you mean, so what? This is what I'm working towards, being, talented and ambitious and all these positive things. And he, after saying, "So what?" he said, "You don't have anything original to say. You sound like a mashup of all of these influences that, you told me about." And he says, including myself. And that's not the way that you contribute to this art form. And my inner monologue was like, what the heck is he talking about? I'm in school. I'm, doing all these transcription assignments. I'm learning how to imitate Thelonious Monk. I'm learning how to imitate Bill Evans and Oscar Peterson and Wynton Kelly and Red Garland and, stride pianists and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I think like any time when you have a real epiphany, your first instinct is resistance. Because, I was climbing, I'm going to do a bad visual. I was climbing this hill, but he was like, no, that's not the hill. This is the hill that you need to be climbing. And, it hadn't occurred to me before because I'd always been in the context of a student. who's trying to get the praise. But he wanted me to exist in this world of being an artist. And so I spent a long time and thought about it, of what that means. And I definitely realized that I didn't know how to do it, that I hadn't been training for that. Now, of course, like, the obvious ending of the story is that I now do know, but that's not exactly true. I am a lot closer than I was then, but I am still really trying to figure out how to peel off the layers of ego and influence and, say something that is uniquely mine. There's so much pressure in jazz to have your own unique voice, but it's something that you can't really force, I don't think. It's something that you can get out of the way of. It's hard to do, but doable. Now, if you're going to ask me how, like, what sorts of things have you realized in this path, in this journey? The first thing that I would say would be playing the song more so than the style. I did a lot of training to be able to play something in the style of Oscar Peterson, for instance, or in a really authentic bebop style. But that is, inherently derivative. If you can play the emotion of the song, if you can picture the song in your head and play through from that place rather than from a place of trying to achieve a certain style, I think that's really valuable. And kind of going with that is getting out of preconceived notions of tradition. An obvious one is head solo, 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 head, right? Very valuable, and you have to master that before you do anything else. But I think part of the process of becoming this artist is, is figure out some different ways into and out of tunes. And especially as a solo pianist, there's just so many options because you don't have to be in the same place as anybody else. So figuring ways to extend introductions, extend outros, put in interludes, transpose, change keys in the middle, go into different sections like contrapuntal sections or single line sections, to really experiment with how you're going to move through a tune, I think is really crucial. And then there's things like selecting repertoire, not just playing tunes because they're on the list of 50 jazz tunes you need to know, but playing tunes that really mean something to you individually. And Fred even advocates for when you play a tune, when you decide you really want to play that tune, to put it in a key that's unique to you, right? To put it in different places on the piano. And Bill Evans did this, right? Bill Evans has a different key for Autumn Leaves than everybody else. But where does it fit on the piano? And if you're going to create an arrangement, where does that fit? And so Fred really just encouraged me to challenge my very notion of what it means to be a musician, much less what it means to be an artist. And it's interesting, saying this on my YouTube channel, because most people who watch it, I know you are in the learning process. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about here, which are in the artistic process, are almost like unlearning, right? You have to kind of build something up, and then you have to, I don't want to say tear it down, but you have to get in the process of allowing other things to come out. So in your first, 2 years of piano learning, I would recommend that you learn the top 50 jazz tunes and that you learn them in the original keys, right? It's not a priority for most people at the beginning of their journey to find their own real individual key and their own individual emotion with the song. For most of the people who come and take lessons with me, I'd be really happy if you can master those styles. But it is interesting to think of, what are we aiming for and how does that change throughout one's career? So I am really, really grateful to have met Fred, to have heard his music, and to have been on the receiving end of some difficult but incredibly valuable advice. If you've never checked out his music, there's so much to recommend, but 2 accessible places to start. Songs Without Words is a lot of discs. I think it's really accessible, especially if you love solo piano. I love his album with Norma Winston called Songs and Lullabies. Her last name is spelled Winstone. There's so many great trio albums. Maybe a really accessible one is the Fred Hersch Trio +2 album. I love those tunes, and there's a little bit more variety in the arrangements with the two horns. But you really can't go wrong. There's so much incredible stuff out there. So if you've watched this far, thank you for watching, and wish Fred a happy birthday in the comments. You never know. Maybe he'll watch this video. Thanks, everybody.